In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a wealthy businessman is found shot dead in his locked study. No weapon, no way in or out. Enter Miss Marple, whose sharp mind unravels a web of secrets, a cunning business partner, a devoted secretary, with a hidden love, a resentful driver, and an estranged daughter with a painful past. A secret passage, a hidden letter, and a pearl-handled pistol reveal a chilling truth: someone planned the perfect crime. But no one can outwit Miss Marple. Will she expose the killer before the shadows of Harcourt Manor strike again? Chapter 1. The scene of the crime. The October mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of the village's tidy cottages and lending an air of quiet mystery to the morning. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her favourite armchair by the bow window of her drawing-room, was engrossed in a delicate piece of knitting, her pale pink shawl, its intricate pattern a testament to her deft fingers and sharper mind. The rhythmic click of her needles was interrupted by the distant chime of the church clock striking 11, followed by a more immediate sound, the crunch of gravel under hurried footsteps. Miss Marple glanced up, her blue eyes bright with curiosity, as her maid, Florence, ushered in Inspector Craddock. His usually composed features were taut, his overcoat damp from the drizzle. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, removing his hat. "I'm afraid I've come on rather grim business." "Murder, I presume," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle but with a keen edge. She set her knitting aside, gesturing to a chair. "Do sit down, Inspector, and tell me everything. A cup of tea, perhaps?" Craddock declined the tea, too preoccupied to indulge in pleasantries. "It's Mr. Reginald Harcourt, up at Harcourt Manor, found dead this morning in his study. Shot through the heart. And here's the rub: the room was locked from the inside. No way in or out." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, her mind already turning over the implications. "A locked room," she murmured, her fingers absently smoothing the wool in her lap. "How very intriguing. Pray, go on." Craddock spread a series of photographs across the lace-covered tea table, their stark images contrasting with the room's cosy warmth. The study, he explained, was a sanctum of polished oak and heavy velvet curtains, its windows bolted shut and the only door locked, with the key found in Harcourt's own pocket. The body had been discovered at dawn by the housemaid, sprawled. Across the desk, a glass of brandy overturned and a faint smear of blood staining the blotter. A single bullet, small caliber, had ended his life, fired at close range. The pistol, however, was nowhere to be found. "The manor's a fortress," Craddock said, rubbing his jaw. "No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the dew outside the windows. It's as if the killer vanished into thin air." Miss Marple studied the photographs, her gaze lingering on the desk's orderly surface, save for the spilled brandy and a single sheet of paper draft of Harcourt's will. Curiously leaving his fortune to a distant charity, she noted the heavy bookcases, the sombre portrait of a woman, presumably Harcourt's late wife, hanging above the fireplace, and a faint scuff on the hearthstone, barely visible in the grainy image. "And the suspects?" she asked, her tone deceptively mild. Craddock sighed. "4, so far. Victor Lang, his business partner, who was at the manor last night. Clara Wentworth, his secretary, who lives on the estate. Tom Brady, the driver, who was about the grounds. And Diana Harcourt, his daughter, estranged, but back in the village after years away." Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring images of the players in this grim drama. She knew of Harcourt, a brusque man whose wealth came from imports, and whose manor loomed over St. Mary Mead like a brooding sentinel. A curious assortment, she said, and motives. Plenty to go around, Craddock admitted. Lang's business was tied to Harcourt's, and not doing well. The secretary, well, she's devoted, but there's talk of underpayment. The driver's a rough sort, had a falling out with Harcourt once, and the daughter, he hesitated. There's bad blood there. She might have wanted revenge. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Revenge is a strong word, Inspector. People are rarely so simple. Tell me, was the study thoroughly searched? As thoroughly as we could manage, Craddock said. But it's a puzzle, Miss Marple. The weapons gone, the rooms sealed, and the suspects all swear they were elsewhere. She leaned back, her fingers resuming their gentle dance with the knitting needles. A locked room is only as locked as the imagination allows, she said softly. I should like to see the manor myself, if you'll permit it. People, you see, leave traces, not just footprints, but in the way they move, the things they touch. Craddock smiled, accustomed to her unassuming brilliance. I was hoping you'd say that. Shall we go this afternoon? Miss Marple inclined her head, her mind already weaving a pattern as intricate as her shawl. A locked room, a missing pistol. A cast of suspects with secret she felt the familiar stir of anticipation. Yes, Inspector, she said. Let us see what Harcourt Manor has to tell us. Chapter 2. The suspects assemble. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Harcourt Manor, its golden rays doing little to warm the chill that hung over the estate. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her tweed coat and a sensible hat, stepped out of Inspector Craddock's car, her eyes taking in the imposing stone facade of the manor. Its tall windows glinted like watchful eyes, and the ivy clinging to the walls seemed to whisper secrets of its own. She clutched her handbag, its contents as unassuming as her appearance a ball of yarn, a pair of spectacles, and a small notebook for jotting down the details that others overlooked. Inspector Craddock, at her side, adjusted his tie, his expression one of restrained impatience. The household's gathered in the drawing-room, he said, leading her up the gravel path. They're a prickly lot, I warn you, none too pleased to be questioned again. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. People seldom are, Inspector, but discomfort often reveals more than comfort does. Let us see what they have to say. The drawing-room of Harcourt Manor was a study in opulence. With its high ceilings, gilded cornices, and a chandelier that sparkled like a frozen cascade, a fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting flickering light over the 4 figures seated within. Miss Marple's sharp eyes catalogued them at once, her mind already sorting through the impressions they gave, much like a gardener assessing the health of her roses. Victor Lang stood by the mantelpiece, a tall man in his early 50s, with silver at his temples and a tailored suit that spoke of wealth, if not taste. His fingers toyed with a gold cigar case, and his eyes, dark and calculating, flicked toward the door as Miss Marple entered. He offered a polite nod, but there was a tightness in his jaw, a man accustomed to control and uneasy without it. Clara. Wentworth sat primly on a velvet settee, her hands folded in her lap, her posture rigid as if braced for an unseen blow. She was a plain woman of 30, her brown hair pinned tightly, her grey dress unadorned save for a small silver brooch. Her eyes, red-rimmed from recent tears, darted nervously toward Victor, then away, as if afraid to linger. Miss Marple noted the tremor in her fingers, the kind that betrayed more than mere grief. Tom Brady, the driver, slouched in an armchair by the window, his burly frame ill at ease in the delicate surroundings. His weathered face, marked by a scar above one eyebrow, was set in a scowl, and his hands, rough from years of manual work, gripped the chair's arms as if anchoring himself against the tide of suspicion. He barely glanced at Miss Marple, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the room. Diana Harcourt stood apart, near a tall bookcase, her arms crossed and her expression one of cold defiance. At 25, she was striking, with her father's sharp cheekbones and a cascade of dark hair that framed her pale face. Her green eyes held a storm of emotions, anger, grief, perhaps fear, but her chin was lifted, as if daring the world to judge her. She wore a simple black dress, but the way she carried herself suggested a woman who had learned to fend for herself. Inspector Craddock cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "This is Miss Marple," he said, his tone formal but with a hint of deference. "She's kindly agreed to assist in our inquiries. I expect your full cooperation." Victor Lang raised an eyebrow, his voice smooth as polished mahogany. "A civilian inspector. Surely the police have resources enough without involving amateurs." His tone was courteous, but the barb was clear. Miss Marple smiled serenely, unfazed. "Oh, I'm quite used to being underestimated, Mr. Lang. It's rather an advantage, you know. People speak more freely when they think you harmless." Clara Wentworth's lips parted as if to speak, but she closed them again, her hands tightening in her lap. Tom Brady snorted softly, and Diana's eyes narrowed, assessing Miss Marple with a flicker of curiosity. Craddock, sensing the tension, pressed on. "Let's go over your movements last night. Mr. Lang, you first." Victor straightened, slipping the cigar case into his pocket. "I was at the Manor until 10, discussing business with Reginald. We parted on civil terms. I then drove to the Rose and Crown for a meeting with a client, a Mr. Peterson. I returned home around midnight." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the slight hesitation over the client's name, as if it were an afterthought. Jotted a note. "This Mr. Peterson can. You provide his contact details." Victor's smile was thin. "I'll need to check my records. He's a new associate, you understand?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite interest. "And how was Mr. Harcourt when you left him?" "In good spirits." Victor's eyes flickered, as good as could be expected. "He was preoccupied with the business. We've had challenges lately." "Challenges," Miss Marple repeated softly, as if savouring the word. "Business can be such a strain, can it not? I recall a gentleman in St. Mary Mead, a grocer, who lost his temper quite spectacularly over a matter of invoices. It quite changed his character." Victor's smile tightened, but he said nothing. Craddock turned to Clara Wentworth. "Miss Wentworth, you were here last night." Clara's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Yes, Inspector. I was in the library, typing letters for Mr. Harcourt. He liked to dictate in the evenings. You see, I finished around midnight and went to my room in the East Wing." Her eyes flicked to Victor again, a fleeting glance that Miss Marple caught and filed away, alone. Craddock pressed, Clara nodded, her cheeks flushing, quite alone. The house was quiet. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "And you heard nothing unusual? No footsteps, no voices? The Manor is so large, sounds must carry oddly." Clara's fingers twisted her brooch. "Nothing, Miss Marple. I was focused on my work." Tom Brady was next, his voice gruff and impatient. "I was in the garage, polishing the Bentley. Mr. Harcourt liked it, spotless. Stayed there till 11:30, then went to my quarters above the stables." He glared at Craddock, as if daring him to challenge the account. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A Bentley, how splendid. I imagine it takes a great deal of care. Were you alone, Mr. Brady, or does the garage see much traffic in the evenings?" Tom's scowl deepened. "Alone, nobody comes poking around the garage at night." Diana Harcourt spoke last, her voice sharp and clipped. "I was at the village inn, dining with a friend, Margaret Lyle. We were there from 8 until 10. Then I returned to my room at the inn. I hadn't seen my father in years, Inspector. I had no reason to come here." Her tone was defiant, but Miss Marple noted the slight quiver in her hands, the way her eyes avoided the portrait of her mother on the wall. Craddock nodded, making notes. "We'll verify these alibis. For now, I'd like you all to remain available. Miss Marple, would you care to see the study?" Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate. "Oh, yes, Inspector. A room can tell one so much, don't you think?" As they left the drawing room, she glanced back, catching the interplay of glances among the suspects, Clara's nervous look at Victor, Tom's sullen stare at the floor, Diana's rigid posture. A household full of secrets, she thought, and secrets are rarely kept alone. The walk to the study was short. Through a corridor lined with ancestral portraits whose stern faces seemed to watch their progress. Miss Marple's mind was already at work, sifting through the morning's impressions. Victor Lang's polished demeanor hid a man under pressure, she suspected, and Clara's devotion to him was more than professional loyalty. Tom Brady's defensiveness suggested a grudge, perhaps an old wound reopened, and Diana, her anger was palpable, but there was something else, a vulnerability beneath the bravado. The study door loomed ahead, its heavy oak unyielding. Craddock unlocked it with a key from his pocket, revealing the scene Miss Marple had studied in photographs. The room was as oppressive in person as it had seemed in the images, its air thick with the faint scent of brandy and something sharper, gunpowder perhaps, or the lingering trace of death. The desk, broad and imposing, bore the marks of the tragedy, the overturned glass, the blood-stained blotter. The single sheet of the draft will. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning every detail. The windows were indeed bolted, their latches rusted from disuse. The bookcases, filled with leather-bound volumes, showed no signs of disturbance. The fireplace, cold now, had that curious scuff on the hearthstone, a mark that seemed out of place in the room's meticulous order. She paused by the portrait of Mrs. Harcourt, a handsome woman with a wistful expression, her painted eyes seeming to follow Miss Marple's movements. "What do you make of it?" Craddock asked, watching her closely. Miss Marple tapped her chin thoughtfully. "A room is like a person, Inspector. It has its habits, its quirks. This one feels watched, as if it's holding its breath." She knelt by the fireplace, her fingers brushing the scuff mark. It was slight, but deliberate, as if something heavy had been dragged across the stone. "Curious," she murmured, straightening. "Very curious indeed." Craddock frowned. "You think there's more to the room than meets the eye?" "Oh!" "There always is," Miss Marple replied, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "People think walls are silent, but they speak if you know how to listen. Tell me, Inspector, have you spoken to the housemaid who found the body?" Craddock nodded. "Elsie, yes. She's shaken, but she said she came in at 6 to open the curtains and found him. She swears the door was locked, and she had to fetch the spare key from the housekeeper. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And the key in Mr. Harcourt's pocket, was it the only one? Craddock hesitated. We assumed so, but we'll check. You think someone tampered with the lock? I think, Miss Marple said, that people are very clever when they wish to be, and very careless when they think they've succeeded. She glanced at the portrait again, her mind turning over the scuff mark, the will, the locked door. Shall we return to the drawing-room? I'd like to hear more from our friends. As they retraced their steps, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of possibilities. The suspects' alibis were flimsy, each one laced with gaps that begged exploration. Victor's vague client, Clara's solitary typing, Tom's isolated garage, Diana's early departure from the inn. None sat quite right, and the study, with its sealed windows and locked door, was a puzzle that demanded a solution not in mechanics, but in human nature. Back in the drawing-room, the suspects had dispersed slightly, though the tension remained. Victor was now by the window, lighting a cigar, the smoke curling like a question mark. Clara sat with a book, though her eyes were fixed on the page without reading. Tom had moved to the doorway, as if itching to escape. Diana stood by the bookcase, her fingers tracing the spine of a volume, her expression unreadable. Miss Marple took her seat, her demeanour as unthreatening as a village spinster's, but her mind was anything but. A dreadful business, she said, addressing the room, but I find it so helpful to understand a person through their habits. Mr. Harcourt, for instance, did he often work late in his study? Clara answered first, her voice hesitant. Yes, quite often. He liked the quiet of the evenings. And you, Miss Wentworth, typing so late, how dedicated you must be, Miss Marple said, her tone warm but probing. Did he ever mention his plans for the future? His business, perhaps, or his family? Clara flushed. He spoke of the business sometimes. He was worried, I think. Victor exhaled a plume of smoke. Reginald was always worried. It was his nature, but he trusted me to handle things. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Trust is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Like a teacup, easily chipped. She turned to Diana. And you, Miss Harcourt, so recently returned. Did you hope to mend things with your father? Diana's eyes flashed. There was nothing to mend. He made his choices long ago. Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the tremor beneath. The pain of old wounds. Tom shifted, his boots scuffing the rug. If you're done, I've got work to do. Craddock raised a hand. Not yet, Mr. Brady. We'll need to verify everyone's whereabouts. Miss Marple, anything else? Miss Marple folded her hands. Only that I'm sure you're all as eager as we are to find the truth. Grief can cloud things, but clarity comes in time. Her words were soft, but her gaze was piercing, lingering on each face in turn. As they left the manor, Craddock glanced at her. You've got that look, Miss Marple. What are you thinking? She smiled faintly, her eyes on the manor's receding silhouette. I'm thinking, Inspector, that people are like houses. They have their public rooms and their hidden passages. We've only seen the drawing room so far. The real answers lie elsewhere. The drive back to St. Mary Mead was silent, but Miss Marple's mind was alive with questions. The scuff mark, the draft will, the glances between Clara and Victor, Diana's guarded pain. Tom's sullen reticent speech was a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to unravel. The locked room was a challenge, but it was the human heart with its tangled motives and secret desires that held the key. Chapter 3. The locked study. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of Harcourt Manor, casting a muted glow over the study where Reginald Harcourt had met his end. Miss Jane Marple stood just inside the threshold, her small figure dwarfed by the room's sombre grandeur. The air was thick with the lingering scents of old leather, cigar smoke, and a faint, acrid trace that she suspected was the ghost of gunpowder. Inspector Craddock hovered nearby, his notebook open, his expression a mix of curiosity and deference as he watched her take in the scene. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp and unclouded despite her years, moved methodically across the room. The study was a fortress of masculine taste. A massive oak desk dominated the center, its surface marred only by the dried stain of spilled brandy and a faint smear of blood, now darkened to a rusty brown. Behind it, a high-backed chair stood askew, as if Harcourt had pushed it back in his final moments. The bookcases, laden with volumes on commerce and history, lined to walls, their shelves undisturbed save for a single gap where a book had been, carelessly replaced upside down. A marble fireplace, cold and unused, occupied the far wall, and above it hung the portrait of Mrs. Harcourt, her painted gaze serene yet somehow reproachful. "Quite a room," Miss Marple murmured, her voice soft but carrying the weight of observation. "It feels guarded, don't you think, Inspector? As if it's keeping its own counsel." Craddock nodded, though his brow furrowed. "Guarded or not, it's a puzzle. Locked door, bolted windows, no weapon. It's as if the killer walked through the walls." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Walls are rarely as solid as they seem. May I?" She gestured toward the desk, and Craddock stepped aside, watching as she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who missed nothing. She began with the desk, her gloved fingers tracing its edges. The draft will, a single sheet of heavy paper, lay where it had been found, its ink stark against the cream. It named a charity as Harcourt's sole beneficiary, a decision that had raised eyebrows among the household. Miss Marple tilted her head, noting the precise handwriting, the lack of corrections. "A draft, yet so final," she said softly, as if he meant it to be seen. Craddock leaned in. "You think it's significant?" "Oh, everything is significant, Inspector, until proven otherwise. A will is a statement of intent, but also of provocation. Someone might have taken it very personally." She glanced at the spilled brandy glass, its contents having left a sticky ring on the blotter. "Was he drinking alone, do you suppose?" "The maid, Elsie, said he often had a nightcap," Craddock replied. "No, second glass was found." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. She moved to the windows, their heavy bolts rusted into place, the sills free of any marks that might suggest tampering. The view beyond showed the manor's gardens, pristine and untouched by the morning's dew, a detail that confirmed no one had climbed in or out. "And the door?" she asked, turning to the heavy oak panel. Craddock pointed to the lock, a sturdy brass mechanism, locked when Elsie arrived. "The key was in Harcourt's pocket, as I said. We've checked for duplicates, but the housekeeper swears there's only one other, kept in her office." Miss Marple approached the door, her fingers brushing the lock. "A key in a pocket is no guarantee of security," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a lady who kept her jewels in a locked box, only to find her maid had a duplicate key made. People are resourceful when they want something." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You think someone copied the key, or Used another means, Miss Marple said, her tone light but her gaze intense. She crossed to the fireplace, drawn again to the scuff mark on the hearthstone. It was faint, a crescent-shaped abrasion, as if something heavy had been dragged or pivoted. She knelt, ignoring the faint creak of her knees, and peered at the stone. "This mark is recent," she said. "The edges are too clean for it too." Be old where Craddock crouched beside her, squinting. Could be nothing. A servant moving a log basket, perhaps. Perhaps, Miss Marple allowed, but her tone suggested otherwise. She rose, her eyes drifting to the portrait above. Mrs. Harcourt's face, captured in oils, seemed to hold a secret, her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "She watches over this room," Miss Marple said, almost to herself. "I wonder what she saw that night." Craddock followed her gaze, puzzled. "You think the portrait's important?" Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. "Everything tells. A story, Inspector. A portrait, a scuff mark, a spilled glass, they're like stitches in a pattern. Pull one, and the whole may unravel." She stepped back, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'd like to speak to the housemaid, Elsie, if I may." "The one who found him," Craddock nodded, leading her out of the study and down the corridor to the servants' quarters. Elsie was a young woman, barely 20, with wide eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her apron. She sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea untouched before her. As Miss Marple settled across from her, "Now, Elsie," Miss Marple began, her voice warm and coaxing. "This must have been a dreadful shock. Tell me exactly what you saw when—" "You entered the study," Elsie swallowed, her hands trembling. "It was just past 6, ma'am. I went to open the curtains, like always. The door was locked, so I fetched the spare key from Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper. When I got in, there he was, slumped over the desk, blood everywhere, and the brandy glass tipped over. I screamed and ran for help." Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "And the room itself? Anything out of place? A sound, perhaps, or something you noticed?" Elsie frowned, thinking it was. "Tidy, ma'am, except for the desk. But there was a smell, sharp-like, not just the brandy, and the chariot was pushed back, like he'd stood up sudden." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Stood up, you say?" As if startled. She glanced at Craddock, who made a note. "And the portrait, did it seem disturbed at all?" Elsie blinked, confused. "The portrait, ma'am. It was just there, same as always. Mrs. Harcourt's picture, watching over him." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning over the girl's words. The sharp smell, the chair's position, the scuff mark, they were fragments, but fragments could form a picture. As they returned to the study, she paused by the bookcase, noting the upside-down book. It was a volume on architecture, its spine cracked as if recently opened. She pulled it out, flipping through its pages, but found nothing tucked within. Still, its misplacement nagged at her. "Inspector," she said, "have your men searched the walls, not just for marks, but for irregularities?" Craddock looked surprised. "The walls? You mean for hidden compartments? Or something like it," Miss Marple said. "In my village, there was an old house with a priest's hole, quite cleverly concealed. People build secrets into their homes, just as they do into their lives." Craddock ordered a constable to tap the walls, but the oak panelling yielded. Only solid thuds. Miss Marple watched, her expression unreadable. "Patience, Inspector," she said as they left the room. "A locked room is only locked until you find the key knot, the one in the pocket but the one in someone's mind. As they stepped into the corridor, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of impressions. The study was a stage, its props carefully arranged, but by whom? The will suggested a motive, the scuff mark a method, and the portrait, well, that was a question for another moment. She thought of the suspects, their guarded faces and half-truths. Someone had entered this room, fired a shot, and left it sealed, leaving only a scuff mark and a missing pistol as clues. People are so careless, she thought, even when they think they're clever. Shall we speak to the housekeeper next? Craddock asked, breaking her reverie. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, and perhaps the gardener. Servants see things. Inspector, even when they don't know they've seen them. And I have a feeling this room has more to say before we're done. As they moved toward the servants' hall, Miss Marple's mind lingered on the study. Its silent witnesses, the portrait, the hearthstone, the misplaced book. Each was a thread, and she was determined to weave them into a pattern that would reveal the truth behind Reginald Harcourt's death. Chapter 4. The Business of Motives. The late afternoon had deepened into a dusky twilight by the time Miss Jane Marple and Inspector Craddock retreated to the village tea-room, a cosy establishment run by Mrs. Puddicombe, whose scones were as renowned as her penchant for gossip. The tea-room's lace curtains and chintz tablecloths offered a stark contrast to the grim opulence of Harcourt Manor, and Miss Marple welcomed the change, settling into a cushioned chair with a sigh of relief. Her fingers, never idle, toyed with the handle of her teacup as Craddock spread his notes across the table, his face etched with the frustration of a man grappling with an insoluble puzzle, for suspects, for alibis, and not one of them airtight. Craddock said, his voice low to avoid the ears of Mrs. Puddicombe, who hovered nearby with a tray of biscuits. Lang's client is a ghost. Wentworth's alone in the library. Brady's in the garage, with no witnesses. And Diana Harcourt's dinner ended early enough for her to slip back to the manor. And that locked room blasted, Miss Marple, it's like a conjurer's trick. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes crinkling with the faintest amusement. Conjuring tricks, Inspector, rely on misdirection. The audience looks where the magician wants them to, not where the real work is done. I suspect our killer is much the same. She set her cup down, her gaze drifting to the window where the village green lay shrouded in evening mist. Tell me more about Mr. Harcourt's business. Money, you see, is often the loudest voice in a murder. Craddock flipped through his notebook, his fingers stained with ink. Harcourt and Lang Imports, dealing in fine good silks, spices, rare woods. Profitable for years, but lately it's been on shaky ground. Lang pushed for expansion, risky. Ventures in South America, Harcourt was cautious, wanted to pull back. They argued often, according to the staff. If Harcourt had withdrawn his capital, Lang would have been ruined. Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring an image of Victor Lang, his polished exterior masking a man teetering on the edge of financial ruin. A desperate man is a dangerous one, she said softly. I knew a gentleman in St. Mary Mead, a draper, who gambled his savings on a bad investment. He became quite unpredictable. What of Miss Wentworth? A secretary sees much, and loyalty can blind as much as it binds. Craddock leaned back, his chair creaking. Clara Wentworth's been with Harcourt 5 years. Devoted, by all accounts, but underpaid. The housekeeper mentioned she'd asked for a raise last month and was refused. She's quiet, efficient, but there's talk she's sweet on Lang. Nothing overt, mind you, just whispers. Miss Marple eyebrows rose slightly. Whispers are often louder than shouts, Inspector. A woman in love can be as fierce as any man in debt. And Mr. Brady, the driver, he seems a rough sort. Tom Brady's a piece of work, Craddock said, his tone darkening. He was sacked 3 years ago for pilfering small things, tools, petrol. Harcourt rehired him out of pity, or so the housekeeper says. Brady's loyal enough now, but there's resentment there. He's got a temper, and he's not fond of answering questions. Miss Marple's fingers tapped the table lightly, as if keeping time with her thoughts. Resentment festers, doesn't it? Like a splinter left under the skin. And Miss Harcourt, the daughter, her estrangement must have a story behind it. Craddock's expression grew grim. Diana Harcourt left home at 18 after a row with her father. He wanted her to marry a business associate, a man twice her age. She refused, and he cut her off. She's been living in London, scraping by as a typist, until she returned to St. Mary Mead a week ago. That will, leaving everything to charities, a slap in her face, gives her a motive as strong as any. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes distant. A slap, yes, but motives are like tea leaves, Inspector. They settle in patterns, but you must read them carefully. A daughter's anger is one thing, but murder requires a colder heart. She paused, her gaze sharpening. What do we know of the business's state? Were there documents, perhaps, that might clarify things? Craddock produced a folder from his briefcase, its edges worn from frequent handling. We found ledgers in the study, but nothing conclusive. Lang's been borrowing heavily to cover losses. And there's a letter from Harcourt to his solicitor, hinting at dissolving the partnership. If Lang knew, it's another nail in his coffin. Miss Marple took the folder, her spectacles perched on her nose as she scanned the pages. The numbers told a story of ambition and miscalculation, of ventures that promised riches but delivered debts. Mr. Lang's cigar case, she murmured. Gold, isn't it? A man who spends on appearances while his business crumbles is a man with something to prove. Craddock nodded, impressed despite himself. You've a knack for seeing through people, Miss Marple. Anything else catch your eye in the study? She closed the folder, her expression thoughtful. The scuff mark on the hearthstone troubles me. It's not the sort of thing one leaves by accident. And that portrait, Mrs. Harcourt's eyes seem to follow you, don't they? I wonder if she saw something we haven't yet. She smiled faintly, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's speak to the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson. She'll know the household's rhythms. They left the tea room, thanking Mrs. Puttycombe, whose curious glances followed them out the door. The walk back to Harcourt Manor was brisk, the evening air sharp with the promise of frost. Mrs. Grayson met them in the servants' hall, a stout woman in her 60s with a nonsense air and eyes that missed little. Her apron was starched to perfection, and her grey hair was pinned with military precision. Mrs. Grayson, Miss Marple began, her tone warm and disarming. You must know this house better than anyone. Tell me, was Mr. Harcourt a man of routine? The housekeeper nodded, her hands clasped tightly. Like clockwork, ma'am. Up at 7, breakfast in the dining room, then to his study by 9. Evenings, he'd work late, often with a brandy. He was particular didn't like being disturbed, and the night of his death. Miss Marple asked, her eyes gentle but probing. Anything unusual? Mrs. Grayson hesitated, her lips pursing. It was quiet, ma'am. Miss Wentworth was in the library, typing. Mr. Lang left around 10, and Mr. Brady was in the garage, or so he says. Miss Diana wasn't here, she's been staying at the inn. But, she trailed off, glancing at Craddock. Go on, he prompted. There was a noise, late, maybe 11. A thud, like something heavy falling. I thought it was just the house settling, but now I'm not sure. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A thud, you say? From the study? I couldn't say for certain, ma'am. This old house creaks and groans, but it came from that wing. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning over the new detail. A thud, a scuff mark, a locked room, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. As they left the servants' hall, she glanced at Craddock. We must verify those alibis, Inspector. Mr. Lang's client, Miss Wentworth's solitude, Mr. Brady's garage, Miss Harcourt's dinner someone is not where they claim to be. Craddock nodded, his jaw set. I've got men checking the Inn and the Rose and Crown. But that room, Miss Marple, it's the key. If we could figure out how the killer got in and out. Miss Marple's smile was serene. Oh, I think we will, Inspector. People are careless, even when they think they're clever. They leave traces not just in rooms, but in their words, their glances. We need only look closely. As they stepped into the Manor's entrance hall, Miss Marple's thoughts were a tapestry of motives and opportunities. Victor Lang's financial desperation, Clara Wentworth's unspoken devotion, Tom Brady's simmering resentment, Diana Harcourt's wounded pride. Each was a thread, and the locked study was the knot that bound them. She thought of the scuff mark, the misplaced book, the portrait's watchful eyes. Someone moved, something, she thought, and someone saw something. The truth is there, waiting to be found. Shall we return to the study tomorrow? Craddock asked, breaking her reverie. Yes, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but resolute. And perhaps we'll ask Mr. Lang about his cigar case, and Miss Wentworth about her typing. Small things, Inspector, can unravel great mysteries. As they parted for the night, Miss Marple walked back to her cottage, the village silent around her. The stars were sharp in the autumn sky, and her mind was sharper still, piecing together the fragments of a crime that was as much about the heart as it was about a locked door. Chapter 5. A whisper of romance. The morning mist had yet to lift from St. Mary Mead as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the village post office. Her steps measured but purposeful. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, and her tweed coat was buttoned against the chill. Her visit was not for stamps or parcels, but for something far more valuable: information. The post office, presided over by the voluble Mrs. Bantry, was the nerve centre of village gossip, a place where whispers took root and flourished like ivy. Inside, the small room was warm, its counter cluttered with envelopes and a jar of boiled sweets. Mrs. Bantry, a stout woman with a penchant for bright scarves and brighter stories, greeted Miss Marple with a knowing smile. Jane, my dear, I heard you're mixed up in that dreadful business at Harcourt Manor. A locked room, they say. It's like something out of a novel. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she accepted a sweet life is often stranger than novels, Dolly, but I find the village always knows more than it thinks. Have you heard anything about the Manors? Household, Mr. Lang, perhaps, or Miss Wentworth? Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. Well, now that you mention it, I saw something curious the other evening at the Rose and Crown. Victor Lang and Clara Wentworth, sitting in a corner, heads close together. Quite cosy, they were, not at all like business associates. I'd wager there's more than typing between them. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was alight with possibilities. How very interesting. And was this a regular occurrence? do you know? Not regular, no, Mrs. Bantry said, adjusting her scarf. But I've seen them there before, always discreet. Clara's a quiet thing, but you can tell she hangs on his every word. And Victor, well, he's the sort who knows how to charm, isn't he? Indeed, Miss Marple murmured, her thoughts turning to Clara's nervous hands and fleeting glances at Victor in the drawing room. A romance, or even an unrequited affection, could shift the balance of motives. If Clara loved Victor, and Victor's fortunes were tied to Harcourt's, her loyalty might have taken a darker turn. Thank you, Dolly. You've been most helpful. Leaving the post office, Miss Marple made her way to the village inn, where Diana Harcourt had claimed to be dining the night of the murder. The inn, a rambling building with a thatched roof, was quiet in the mid-morning lull. The landlord, Mr. Gibbs, a jovial man with a florid face, was polishing glasses behind the bar. He brightened at Miss Marple's arrival, offering her a chair and a glass of elderflower cordial. "Miss Marple, come about poor Mr. Harcourt, I reckon," he said, his hands pausing on a glass. "Terrible business. His daughter was here that night, you know." "So I understand," Miss Marple said, sipping her cordial. "Miss Harcourt said she dined with a friend, a Miss Lyle. Can you tell me about it?" Mr. Gibbs nodded, his brow furrowing. "Aye, Miss Diana was here with Margaret Lyle, a nice young lady from London. They came in about 8, ordered the roast beef, but Diana seemed out of sorts, picking at her food, glancing at the clock. She left early, before 10, said she wasn't feeling well. Margaret stayed a bit longer, paid the bill." Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her glass. "Before 10, you say? And did she say where she was going?" "Back to her room upstairs, I assumed," Mr. Gibbs said. "She's been staying here since she came back to the village. Didn't see her leave the inn again, but I was busy in the kitchen after that." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind noting the gap in Diana's alibi. If she left the inn by 10, she had time to reach the manor before the estimated time of Harcourt's death, around 11. But was her anger enough to drive her to murder? Miss Marple thought of Diana's defiant posture, her trembling hands. Yes, but also fear. Not guilt, she mused, but perhaps something she's hiding. Returning to Harcourt Manor, Miss Marple found Inspector Craddock in the entrance hall, conferring with a constable about the alibis. He looked up, his face weary but hopeful. "Any luck in the village, Miss Marple?" "A little," she said, her tone light. "Miss Harcourt's dinner ended earlier than she implied, and there's talk of a closeness between Mr. Lang and Miss Wentworth. It may mean nothing, but it's a thread worth pulling." Craddock's eyes narrowed. Clara and Lang. That could explain her nervousness. If she's in love with him, and he's in financial trouble. "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "Love and money are old partners in crime, Inspector. Shall we speak to Miss Wentworth again? I'd like to see how she reacts to a gentle prod." They found Clara in the library, a high-ceilinged room lined with books, and a long table where she claimed to have been typing the night of the murder. She was sorting papers, her movements jerky, her face pale. At their entrance, she started, a sheet slipping from her hands to the floor. "Miss Wentworth," Miss Marple said, her voice warm and unthreatening, "we won't keep you long. I was just admiring the library, so quiet, perfect for work. You were here late that night, weren't you?" Clara nodded, retrieving the paper with trembling fingers. "Yes, until midnight. Mr. Harcourt had dictated several letters, and I wanted to finish them." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the typewriter on the table, its ribbon slightly askew. Such dedication. And all alone, with the house so still. Did you see Mr. Lang before he left for his meeting? Clara's cheeks flushed, a faint pink against her pallor. Mr. Lang. He came to the library briefly to discuss a contract. He left soon after, around 10. Miss Marple smiled, her gaze gentle but piercing. How fortunate to have such a colleague. I imagine you and Mr. Lang work closely, given the business's challenges. Clara's hands twisted together, her voice barely above a whisper. We do our best to support Mr. Harcourt. It's been difficult lately. Craddock stepped in, his tone firmer. Miss Wentworth, can anyone confirm you were here all evening? The housemaid heard a noise, around 11, a thud, possibly from the study. Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head. I heard nothing. Inspector, I was typing, and the machine is rather loud. I wouldn't have noticed. Miss Marple noted the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting Victor Lang to appear. Thank you, Miss Wentworth, she said. You've been most helpful. As they left the library, Craddock muttered, She's hiding something. That blush when you mentioned Langets, more than professional loyalty. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the new threads into the pattern. Love makes fools of us all, Inspector, but it can also make monsters. If Miss Wentworth believed Mr. Harcourt threatened Mr. Lang's future, she might have acted to protect him. She paused, her eyes distant. But we mustn't leap too far. Let's speak to Mr. Lang again. His meeting at the Rose and Crown interests me. They found Victor Lang in the Manor's conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with ferns and the scent of damp earth. He was trimming a rosebush, his movements precise, though his eyes were guarded as they approached. Inspector. Miss Marple, he said, setting down his shears. More questions, I presume? Just a few, Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. Your meeting at the Rose and Crown, Mr. Lang such a charming place. Was Mr. Peterson a regular associate? Victor's smile was smooth, but his fingers tightened on the shears. A new contact, as I said. We discussed potential investments. I'm afraid I don't have his details to hand, but I can provide them soon. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. How inconvenient. I once knew a gentleman who forgot a client's name at a most inopportune moment. It turned out he'd invented the client entirely. People do such things when they're pressed. Victor's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. I assure you, Miss Marple, my memory is sound. I was at the Rose and Crown until midnight. Craddock scribbled a note. We'll check with the staff there. And your discussion with Miss Wentworth that night, what was the contract about? Minor matter, Victor said, waving a hand. Shipping schedules, nothing more. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the slight sheen of perspiration on his brow despite the cool air. He's lying, she thought, but about what? And how much? Aloud, she said, You're very fortunate to have Miss Wentworth's support. She seems quite devoted to the business. Victor's eyes flicked away, a shadow crossing his face. Clara's invaluable. She keeps things running smoothly. As they left the conservatory, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. Clara's love for Victor, Victor's shaky alibi. Diana's early departure from the inn each was a piece of the puzzle, but the locked study remained the heart of it. The thud Mrs. Grayson heard, the scuff mark on the hearthstone, the misplaced book in the study, they suggested a method, but the motive was still a shadow. Inspector, she said, as they stepped into the Manor's garden, we must verify Mr. Lang's meeting. And I'd like to speak to Miss Lyle, Diana's friend. She may know why Diana left so early. Craddock nodded, his expression resolute. I'll send a constable to the Rose and Crown and track down Miss Lyle. But that room, Miss Marple. Still the key. Miss Marple's smile was serene. Oh, it is, Inspector. But keys come in many forms. The one we seek is hidden in someone's heart, and I believe we're getting closer to finding it. As they parted, Miss Marple glanced back at the manor, its windows dark against the fading light. The whisper of romance between Clara and Victor was a new thread, one that tied love to ambition and perhaps to murder. The locked room was a challenge, but the human heart was a greater one, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel both. Chapter 6. The Secret Passage. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of Harcourt Manor, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floors. Miss Jane Marple, accompanied by Inspector Craddock, returned to the study, her mind as sharp as the autumn air outside. She carried a small tapestry bag, its contents innocuous: a ball of yarn, a pair of knitting needles, and a measuring tape butt. Her eyes held a quiet determination. The locked room, with its sealed windows and unyielding door, was a riddle that demanded solving, and Miss Marple was not one to shy away from a challenge. The study was as they had left it, its heavy air undisturbed, save for the faint rustle of a constable's footsteps in the corridor. The desk, with its blood-stained blotter and overturned brandy glass, stood as a silent testament to Reginald Harcourt's final moments. The portrait of Mrs. Harcourt gazed down, her painted eyes seeming to hold a secret that Miss Marple was determined to uncover. The scuff mark on the hearthstone, noted during her previous visit, nagged at her. A small irregularity in the room's meticulous order. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but purposeful, "I'd like to examine the fireplace again. That market's out of place, don't you think? In a room so carefully kept." Craddock nodded, though his expression betrayed skepticism. "It could be nothing, Miss Marple. A servant's carelessness, perhaps. But go ahead, I've learned to trust your instincts." Miss Marple knelt by the hearth, her fingers brushing the crescent-shaped abrasion. It was shallow but distinct, the stone's surface marred as if something had been dragged or pivoted. She pressed gently on the hearthstone, testing its edges. A faint click sounded, barely audible, and a panel to the right of the fireplace slid open with a low groan, revealing a narrow, dust-laden passage. Craddock's jaw dropped, his notebook slipping from his hand. Good heavens, a secret passage. Miss Marple rose, dusting her gloves, her expression serene, but her eyes alight with satisfaction. "Not so secret now, Inspector. Old houses like this often have such quirks. In St. Mary Mead there was a vicarage with a hidden stair behind the pantry. People build these things for all sorts of reasons: escape, secrecy, or simply mischief." Craddock peered into the passage, its walls rough and unplastered, the air stale with years of disuse. "Where does it lead?" he asked, producing a torch from his pocket and shining its beam into the gloom. "Let's find out," Miss Marple said, stepping back to let him take the lead. The passage was cramped, forcing Craddock to stoop, but Miss Marple followed with surprising agility, her measuring tape dangling from her hand like a talisman. The floor was coated in dust, but here and there, faint disturbances suggested recent passage-smudged footprints, too indistinct to identify but enough to confirm use. The passage wound behind the study's walls, its path twisting until it emerged behind a bookcase in the library, where Clara Wentworth had claimed to be typing the night of the murder. The bookcase swung outward with a creak, revealing the library's familiar expanse, the long table, the typewriter with its skewed ribbon, the shelves of books untouched by time. Craddock shook his head, incredulous. This changes everything. Someone could have entered the study, shot Harcourt, and left without ever touching the door or windows. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the library. Indeed, Inspector. And Miss Wentworth was here, so close to the passage's exit. Convenient, don't you think? She stepped to the typewriter, noting a faint smudge of dust on its keys, barely visible but telling. Someone used this passage recently, and they weren't as careful as they thought. Craddock frowned, his torch still in hand. But who knew about it? The manners, old but secret passages, aren't exactly common knowledge. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Knowledge is a curious thing, Inspector. It hides in old stories, forgotten plans, or the memory of a loyal servant. We must ask Mrs. Grayson if the manor has any such legends, and we must look at that book in the study, the one on architecture, misplaced so carelessly. They returned to the study via the main corridor, not wishing to disturb the passage further. Miss Marple retrieved the volume she had noticed earlier, its spine cracked and its title, Manor Houses of England, promising insight. She flipped through its pages, pausing at a chapter on hidden features in Elizabethan homes. A folded sheet slipped out a yellowed blueprint of Harcourt Manor, its edges brittle. The passage was marked, a faint line snaking from the study to the library. Well, I'll be, Craddock said, peering over her shoulder. This is the manor, clear as day. Someone found this, or knew where to look. Miss Marple folded the blueprint carefully, handing it to Craddock. Someone did, indeed, and they used it to move unseen. But why? To kill, yes, but also to conceal. A locked room is a perfect alibi if you can make it seem impenetrable. Craddock tucked the blueprint into his notebook. We'll need to question the household again. If Clara was in the library, she might have seen or heard something or used the passage herself. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the portrait of Mrs. Harcourt, or someone else did, counting on her presence to muddy the waters. Let's speak to her first. Her devotion to Mr. Lang makes her a key piece in this puzzle. They found Clara Wentworth in the drawing room, seated by a window with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, and her hands fidgeted with the silver brooch pinned to her dress. At their approach, she started, nearly spilling her tea. Miss Wentworth, Miss Marple began, her tone gentle as a grandmother's weave, made a curious discovery. A passage, hidden behind the study's fireplace, leading to this very library. You were here that night, weren't you? Clara's eyes widened, her fingers tightening on the brooch. A passage. I had no idea such a thing existed. I was typing, as I told you. I didn't hear anything unusual. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze soft but unyielding. Not even a creak or a footstep. The library is so close to the study, and old houses carry sounds in the strangest ways. I once knew a lady in St. Mary Mead whose attic creaked every time her neighbour walked his dog. It was most distracting. Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. Nothing, Miss Marple. I was focused on my work. The typewriter is loud, and I keep to myself. Craddock stepped forward, his tone firmer. Miss Wentworth, the passage's exit is behind that bookcase. If someone used it, they'd have come through here. You're sure you saw nothing? Clara's flush deepened, her eyes darting to the door. I'm sure, Inspector. I was alone until midnight. Then I went to my room. Miss Marple noted the tremor in her voice, the way her gaze avoided theirs. She's frightened, she thought, but of what? Discovery or something else? Aloud, she said, "Thank you, Miss Wentworth. You've been very patient." As they left the drawing room, Craddock muttered, "She's lying, or at least holding something back. That passage puts her right in the frame." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the blueprint, the dust on the typewriter, Clara's nervous hands. "Perhaps, Inspector, but we mustn't rush to judgment. Someone else may have known of the passage, Mr. Lang, perhaps, or even Mr. Brady, and Miss Harcourt, though estranged, grew up in this house. Old secrets linger in families." They sought out Mrs. Grayson next, finding her in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of lunch. The housekeeper's stern demeanor softened slightly at Miss Marple's approach, though her eyes were wary. "Mrs. Grayson," Miss Marple said, "this manor is a treasure trove of history. Have you ever heard tales of hidden passages or secret rooms?" The housekeeper's lips pursed, her hands pausing on a stack of linens. "There's always been talk, ma'am. Old houses like this have their stories. When I was first here, 30 years ago, the old butler mentioned a passage used during the Civil War for hiding valuables. I thought it was just a tale, but the library and study were mentioned." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "And did you share this tale with anyone? Miss Wentworth, perhaps, or Mr. Lang?" Mrs. Grayson shook her head. "Not I, ma'am. It's not my place to gossip, but the manor's plans are in the library, in an old folder. Anyone could have found them." Craddock made a note. "We'll check that folder." "Thank you, Mrs. Grayson." As they stepped into the corridor, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. The passage was no longer a secret, but its use was a deliberate act, planned by someone with access to the manor's history. Clara's proximity made her a suspect, but Victor's cunning, Tom's resentment, or even Diana's hidden knowledge could not be dismissed. The blueprint, tucked away in a book, suggested someone had sought it out, and the dust in the passage confirmed recent use. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, "we must keep watch on that passage tonight. Someone may try to use it again, thinking it's still hidden, and we must verify Mr. Lang's meeting and Miss Harcourt's movements after leaving the inn." Craddock nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll have a constable stationed in the library, discreetly. And we're still tracking down Miss Lyle and checking the Rose and Crown. But that passage, Miss Marple, it's the break we needed." Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "It's a door, Inspector, but not the only one. The real door is in someone's mind, and it's beginning to open." As they left the manor, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the estate in shadow. The secret passage was a revelation, but it was the human secrets, love, greed, betrayal, that would unlock the truth behind Reginald Harcourt's death. Miss Marple's knitting needles would remain still tonight, her mind too busy weaving the threads of a crime that was as intricate as any pattern she had ever crafted. Chapter 7. The Daughter's Tale. The morning light filtered weakly through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a muted glow on the cobbled streets as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the village. Her steps were steady, her tweed coat buttoned against the damp chill, and her tapestry bag swung lightly at her side. The discovery of the secret passage had shifted the puzzle of Reginald Harcourt's murder, but it was the human thread's motive, opportunity, and hidden truths that drew her focus now. Diana Harcourt, the estranged daughter, was a piece of the pattern that needed closer examination. her guarded demeanor and shaky alibi suggesting more than mere resentment. The inn's common room was quiet, its oak beams and whitewashed walls exuding a warmth that belied the grim purpose of Miss Marple's visit. Mr. Gibbs, the landlord, directed her upstairs to Diana's room, his expression a mix of sympathy and curiosity. "She's been keeping to herself, Miss Marple," he said, lowering his voice. "Poor lass, losing her father like that, even if they weren't close." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. "Grief takes many forms, Mr. Gibbs. Thank you for your help." She climbed the narrow staircase, her mind turning over Diana's early departure from her dinner with Margaret Lisle, the thud heard by Mrs. Grayson, and the secret passage that could have carried someone to the study unnoticed. Diana answered the knock promptly, her pale face framed by the door's dark wood. She wore a simple grey dress, her dark hair pulled back, and her green eyes held a wariness that deepened at the sight of Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock, who had joined her at the inn. "What do you want now?" she asked, her voice sharp, but with an undercurrent of fatigue. "Only a few moments, Miss Harcourt," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle as a summer breeze. "May we come in? It's rather chilly in the corridor." Diana hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing them into the small room. It was sparsely furnished: a bed, a dresser, a single chair by a window overlooking the village green. A few books lay stacked on the dresser, their titles suggesting a taste for poetry and history. Miss Marple noted a photograph tucked into the mirror's frame, a young Diana with her mother, both smiling, a stark contrast to the woman before her now. "We've found something curious at the manor," Miss Marple began, settling into the chair as Diana stood stiffly by the bed. "A passage, hidden behind the study's fireplace, leading to the library. It changes things, you see, about how someone might have reached your father." Diana's eyes widened, but her expression remained guarded. "A passage? I didn't know such a thing existed. I haven't lived at the manor since I was a girl." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze soft but searching. "Of course, my dear, but old houses hold memories, don't they? When I was young, my aunt's home had a secret cupboard where we children hid during games. Did you ever play such games at the manor, perhaps stumble on something hidden?" Diana's hands clenched, her knuckles whitening. "No, Miss Marple, my father wasn't one for games. He was controlling. The manor was his domain, not mine." Her voice held a bitter edge, but her eyes flicked to the photograph, a fleeting softness crossing her face. Craddock, standing by the door, opened his notebook. "Miss Harcourt, you said you were here at the inn after 10, but Mr. Gibbs says you left your dinner early, before 10. Where did you go?" Diana's jaw tightened, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I wasn't feeling well. I came back to my room and stayed here. I didn't go to the manor, if that's what you're implying." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "It's not an accusation, my dear, but time is a slippery thing, and alibis matter. Your friend, Miss Lee, she'll know more about your mood that evening. A friend often sees what we hide from ourselves." Diana's eyes flashed, a mix of anger and fear. "Margaret has nothing to do with this. She stayed longer at the table, that's all. I was here, alone." Her voice trembled, not with guilt, Miss Marple thought, but with something deeper, perhaps a secret she feared to reveal. Craddock pressed on. "The passage changes things, Miss Harcourt. Someone used it to reach your father, and you grew up in that house. If you knew of it, even as a child, I didn't. Diana snapped her composure fraying. I hated that house, and I hated him. He drove my mother away, tried to sell me off like one of his shipments, but I didn't kill him. I wouldn't set foot in that study. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was sharp as ever. Hate is a heavy burden, Miss Harcourt. I once knew a young woman in St. Mary Mead who carried such anger toward her father. It made her reckless, but not a murderer. What did you do after leaving the inn? Diana hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. I walked, just around the village. I needed air. I didn't go near the manor, I swear. Craddock made a note, his expression skeptical. We'll need to speak to Miss Lyle to confirm your mood and movements. And we'll check if anyone saw you in the village. Miss Marple rose, her gaze lingering on the photograph. Your mother was lovely, she said softly. She must have loved you dearly. Did your father ever speak of her in those last years? Diana's eyes filled with unshed tears, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't deserve her, and he didn't deserve me. She turned away, her shoulders rigid, signaling the end of the conversation. As they left the inn, Craddock muttered, She's hiding something. But I don't think it's murder. That anger, it's real, but it's not cold enough for a calculated shot. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on Diana's trembling hands and the photograph's tender smile. She's protecting something, Inspector, perhaps a memory or a fear. But the passage points elsewhere. Let's return to the manor and speak to Mr. Lang. His connection to Miss Wentworth grows more intriguing. At Harcourt Manor, they found Victor Lang in the dining room, reviewing papers with a glass of sherry at his elbow. His tailored suit was impeccable, but his eyes held a flicker of unease as Miss Marple and Craddock entered. More questions? I presume, he said, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. A few, Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. We've found a passage, Mr. Lang, from the study to the library. It suggests someone moved through the house unseen. You were in the library briefly that night, with Miss Wentworth. Did you notice anything unusual? Victor's fingers paused on his glass, his smile tight. A passage? How extraordinary. No, I saw nothing odd. Clara was typing, and we discussed a contract for a few minutes. I left for my meeting at the Rose and Crown soon after. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. The Rose and Crown, yes. A charming place. I understand you and Miss Wentworth have been seen there together, quite companionably. She must value your guidance. Victor's expression hardened, though his voice remained polite. Clara's a fine secretary. We discuss business, nothing more. I hope you're not relying on village gossip, Miss Marple. Oh, gossip is like a breeze, she said lightly. It carries seeds, some true, some not. But a passage, Mr. Lang, that's no gossip. Someone used it, and you were close to its entrance. Craddock stepped in, his tone firm. We're still checking your alibi, Mr. Lang. No one at the Rose and Crown recalls a Mr. Peterson. Care to clarify? Victor's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. A misunderstanding, Inspector. I'll provide his details soon. I was there until midnight, as I said. Miss Marple noted the faint sheen on his brow, the way his fingers gripped the sherry glass. He's nervous, she thought, but is it guilt or fear of being caught in a lie? Aloud, she said, Thank you, Mr. Lang. We'll trouble you no further for now. As they left the dining room, Craddock said, He's slippery, that one. And Clara's devotion to him, it's a motive, if she thought Harcourt was ruining him. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the threads together. Diana's fear, Victor's evasions, Clara's nervousness. The passage's dust-smudged floorage was a clue, but the pattern was not yet clear. "We must find Miss Lyle," she said, "and we must watch that passage, Inspector. Someone may think it's still their secret." Craddock agreed, arranging for a constable to monitor the library discreetly. As they stepped into the Manor's garden, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the house's stone facade, its windows like eyes keeping watch. The secret passage had opened a door in the case, but it was the secrets of the heart, Diana's pain, Clara's love, Victor's ambition that would lead to the truth. "People think they can hide," she mused, "but their shadows always follow." Chapter 8. The partners' game. The late morning sky over St. Mary Mead was heavy with clouds, casting a sombre pall over Harcourt Manor as Miss Jane Marple and Inspector Craddock returned to its imposing gates. The discovery of the secret passage had cracked open the mystery of Reginald Harcourt's death, but the human element's ambition, loyalty, and hidden desires remained the true keys to the puzzle. Miss Marple's sharp eyes, hidden behind her unassuming demeanour, were fixed on Victor Lang, whose polished exterior and vague alibi suggested a man playing a deeper game. They found Victor in the Manor's billiard room, a dimly lit space where the green felt of the table glowed under a single hanging lamp. He was practicing shots, the clack of the balls punctuating the silence. His suit was immaculate, but his posture betrayed a tension that no amount of nonchalance could mask. At their entrance, he straightened, setting down his cue with a practiced smile. "Inspector, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I trust you're making progress." "Some," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild but her gaze piercing. "The Manor has revealed one of its secrets, sir, passage from the study to the library. It's quite a find, don't you think? Someone moved through it the night Mr. Harcourt died." Victor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his fingers brushing the edge of the billiard table. "A passage? How quaint. This old pile is full of surprises, but I assure you I knew nothing of it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Lang. But you were in the library that night with Miss Wentworth, before your meeting at the Rose and Crown. The passage's entrance is so close, surely you might have noticed something. A creak, perhaps, or a draught." Victor's eyes narrowed, though his smile held. "I'm afraid I was preoccupied with business matters. Clara and I discussed a contract, as I told you. I left for my meeting shortly after 10. Craddock, standing by the door with his notebook open, interjected, "About that meeting, Mr. Lang. The Rose and Crown staff have no record of a Mr. Peterson, and no one recalls seeing you there past 10:30. Care to explain?" Victor's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Misunderstanding, Inspector. I met Peterson in a private room, and I may have left earlier than I recalled. The evening was hectic. I'll provide his contact details today." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Memory can be so unreliable, can't it? I once knew a gentleman in St. Mary Mead who swore he'd been at a parish meeting when he was actually at the pub. It caused quite a stir when the truth came out." She paused, her gaze steady. "Business troubles can cloud the mind. Mr. Lang, I understand Harcourt and Lang Imports was facing difficulties. Mr. Harcourt's caution must have been trying." Victor's smile was a thin veneer now, his voice cool. "Reginald and I had our differences, but they were professional. His death benefits no one, least of all me. The business is in limbo now." Miss Marple nodded, as if accepting his words at face value, but her mind was cataloguing the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow, the way his hand lingered near his pocket, where she knew he kept his gold cigar case. A man who spends on appearances while his fortunes falter, she thought, is a man with something to hide. Aloud, she said, "You're very fortunate to have Miss Wentworth's support. Her dedication must be a comfort in such trying times." Victor's expression softened, though his eyes remained wary. "Clara's a gem. She keeps the wheels turning, even when things are challenging." Craddock made a note, his tone sharp. "We'll need those details on Peterson, Mr. Lang, and soon. And we'll be checking the library for any traces of that passage's use. If you remember anything else, now's the time." Victor inclined his head, his composure regained. "Of course, Inspector. I'm at your disposal." As they left the billiard room, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Victor's alibi was unraveling, his vague client a fiction that crumbled under scrutiny. His connection to Clara, confirmed by village whispers, suggested a partnership that might extend beyond business. But had he used the passage himself, or was he content to let another take the risk? "He's clever," she mused, "the sort who lets others carry the weight of his schemes." They sought out Tom Brady next, finding him in the garage, a cavernous space smelling of oil and polish. He was bent over the Bentley's engine, his scarred hands deft with a wrench, but his scowl deepened at their approach. "What now?" he grunted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just a few questions." "Mr. Brady," Miss Marple said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "We've found a passage in the manor from the study to the library. It changes how someone might have reached Mr. Harcourt. You were in the garage that night, you said. Did you see anyone moving about the grounds?" Tom's eyes flicked to Craddock, then back to his work. "I told you, I was here till 11:30, polishing this beast. Didn't see nobody, didn't hear nothing." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his scar seemed to tighten with his frown. "A garage is a busy place, isn't it? I imagine you know the manners, comings and goings. Did Mr. Harcourt ever mention anything about hidden passages, perhaps as a curiosity?" Tom snorted, tossing the rag aside. "He didn't talk to me about nothing but the car. Passages sounds like fairy tales. I mind my own business." Stepped forward, his notebook out. "A villager claims they saw you near the manor's west wing around 11, not here. Care to explain?" Tom's hands clenched, his voice low and defensive. "They're mistaken. I was here, like I said. People see what they want to see." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. "People do, don't they? But truth has a way of showing itself. I once knew a gardener who swore he was pruning roses when he was actually pilfering apples. It's the small things that give us away." Tom's scowl deepened, but he said nothing, turning back to the engine as if dismissing them. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Craddock, her mind noting Tom's defensiveness. The villager's sighting, the passage's proximity to the manor's west wing. He's hiding something, she thought, but is it murder or a lesser sin? As they walked back to the manor's entrance, Craddock said, "Lang's lying about his meeting, and Brady's not much better. That passage puts them both in a tight spot, but Clara's still the closest to it. Her devotion to Lang could she have acted for him. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the dust-smudged passage floor, the blueprint hidden in the studies. Book, possibly, Inspector, but we mustn't forget Miss Harcourt. Her anger is real, but her fear suggests something else is secret, perhaps that she's guarding. And Mr. Brady's temper, it's like a smouldering coal, ready to flare. Craddock rubbed his jaw, his expression weary. We're getting closer, but the passage only tells us how, not who. We need more on their motive/slangs debts. Clara's feelings, Brady's grudge, Diana's estrangement. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. Motives are like shadows, Inspector. They shift, but they're always tied to the light of truth. Let's speak to Miss Lyle, Diana's friend, and check that folder in the library Mrs. Grayson mentioned. The manor's secrets are opening, one by one. They moved to the library, where the folder of manor plans was found tucked among dusty tomes. It contained more blueprints, but none as revealing as the one in the study. Miss Marple's fingers lingered on the pages, her mind turning over the passages used. The thud heard by Mrs. Grayson, the scuff mark on the hearthstone. Someone planned this, she thought, and they thought themselves clever. But cleverness leaves traces, and we're finding them. As they left the library, Miss Marple glanced at the bookcase that hid the passage's exit. "Keep your constable watching this tonight, Inspector," she said. "Someone may think they can still use it, and will be waiting." Craddock nodded, his resolve firm. "And I'll have Lang's so-called client tracked down by morning. If Peterson doesn't exist, he's got more explaining to do." Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. He does, indeed. But it's not just what people say, Inspector, it's what they don't say. The silences in this house are speaking louder than words. As they stepped into the chill of the manor's courtyard, Miss Marple's thoughts were a tapestry of suspicion. Victor's crumbling alibi, Tom's sullen denial, Clara's nervous devotion. Diana's guarded fear, each was a thread, and the passage was the needle pulling them together. The locked room was no longer a mystery of mechanics, but of motives. And Miss Marple was determined to unravel the truth before another shadow fell. Chapter 9. The portrait's clute the afternoon light filtered through the high windows of Harcourt Manor, casting a soft, golden glow across the study where Reginald Harcourt had met his end. Miss Jane Marple stood once more in the room's sombre embrace, her eyes drawn irresistibly to the portrait of Mrs. Harcourt above the fireplace. The late mistress of the manor gazed down with an enigmatic calm, her painted lips curved in a way that seemed to whisper secrets. Miss Marple's tapestry bag rested at her feet, its contents untouched, but her mind was anything but idle, weaving together the threads of the secret passage, the suspects' faltering alibis, and the nagging sense that the room itself held more answers than it had yet revealed. Inspector Craddock stood by the desk, his notebook open, his brow furrowed with the weight of a case that seemed to twist with every new discovery. "We've got the passage, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "and Lang's alibi is falling apart. No sign of this Peterson at the Rose and Crown. But we're still no closer to pinning down who used that passage or why." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze fixed on the portrait. "Patience, Inspector. A room like this is like a person. It keeps its secrets close, but it cannot help leaving traces. That portrait, for instance, Mrs. Harcourt seems to watch us, doesn't she? I wonder what she saw the night her husband died." Craddock glanced up, puzzled. The portrait. "It's just a painting, surely." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Oh, paintings can be more than they seem, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, there was a vicar whose portrait hid a safe behind it, filled with letters he'd rather no one read. Let's have a closer look. She stepped to the fireplace, her movements deliberate despite the slight stiffness in her joints. The portrait was large, its heavy gilt frame secured to the wall with sturdy fittings. Miss Marple ran her fingers along its edges, noting a slight misalignment of hairs, breadths of tilt that seemed out of place in the room's meticulous order. Inspector, might you assist me? This frame looks rather heavy. Craddock, intrigued, called for a constable to help. Together, they carefully lifted the portrait from its hooks, revealing a small, square panel set into the wall. A faint seam outlined a safe, its lock gleaming with recent polish. Craddock's eyes widened. Well, I'll be damned. A safe? How did you know? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. I didn't, Inspector, but people are predictable. They hide their treasures where they feel safest, and a portrait is a guardian of sorts. She stepped back as Craddock summoned the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, to inquire about the safe's key. Mrs. Grayson, her face pale with surprise, fetched a small key from a locked drawer in her office. Mr. Harcourt kept this with me, she said, her voice unsteady. He said it was for private papers, nothing more. Craddock turned the key in the lock, and the safe's door swung open with a soft click. Inside was a single item, sealed envelope, addressed in Harcourt's precise hand to my dear Diana. Miss Marple's heart gave a small leap, though her expression remained serene. A letter to his daughter, she murmured. How? Very telling. Craddock opened the envelope carefully, revealing a single sheet of paper. He read aloud, his voice steady but tinged with surprise. My dear Diana, I have been a poor father, and pride has kept me silent too long. I regret our estrangement and the pain I caused you and your mother. I intend to revise my will, restoring your inheritance. Come to the manor and let us begin anew. Your father, Reginald Harcourt. The letter was dated 2 days before his death, its ink fresh, its words heavy with unspoken remorse. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was racing. He meant to make amends, she said softly. But someone knew of this letter, or suspected it, and they didn't want it sent. Craddock folded the letter, placing it in an evidence bag. This changes things. Diana had no reason to kill him if she knew he was softening. But if someone else, Lang perhaps, or Clara, knew he was changing the will. Miss Marple nodded. Her thoughts on Clara Wentworth's nervous hands, Victor Lang's crumbling alibi, and the secret passage's dust-smudged floor. Miss Wentworth had access to Mr. Harcourt's correspondence, she said. She typed his letters, organized his papers. If she saw this, or even suspected it, it might have threatened everything she held dear. Mr. Lang's future, perhaps. Craddock's jaw tightened, and Lang stood to lose the most if Harcourt pulled his capital or changed his will to favor Diana. We need to confront them both again, and soon. Miss Marple held up a hand, her expression thoughtful. Not yet, Inspector. Knowledge is our advantage now, and we must use it carefully. If we reveal the letter, the guilty party may act rashly or cover their tracks further. Let's speak to Miss Lyle first, Diana's friend. She may shed light on Diana's state of mind that night. They left the study, the portrait rehung, but its secret now exposed. Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of connections, the letter, the passage, the scuff mark on the hearthstone, the misplaced book on architecture. Each was a clue, but the human heart was the true map. Diana's fear, Clara's devotion, Victor's ambition. Tom Brady's sullen resentment, they were pieces of a pattern, and the letter was a new thread, pulling the design into focus. The village inn, they found Margaret Lyle in the tea room, a lively young woman with auburn hair and an easy smile that faded at their approach. "Miss Marple, Inspector," she said, setting down her teacup. "This is about Diana, isn't it? She's been so upset since her father's death." Miss Marple settled across from her, her demeanor as comforting as a familiar shawl. "We're trying to understand that night, Miss Lyle. Diana said she left your dinner early, before 10. Can you tell us why?" Margaret's eyes clouded with concern. She was restless, not herself. She'd had a letter from her father a few days before, asking her to meet him. It stirred up old feelings on her mostly, but also hope. She said she needed air and left. The table. I assumed she went to her room, but I didn't see her after. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "A letter, you say? Did she show it to you?" Margaret shook her head. "No, but she mentioned it was an olive branch, or so she thought. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. She left the inn around 9:30, I'd say." Craddock made a note, his expression grim. "Did she say anything about going to the manor?" "No," Margaret said firmly. She swore she'd never set foot there again, but she was unsettled. "I stayed till 10, paid the bill, and went home." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind noting the overlap with Diana's account, but also the gap 9:30 to 11, when the thud was heard. Was time enough for a walk to the manor, but Diana's fear suggested otherwise. She's hiding. A truth, Miss Marple thought, but not murder. Something else keeps her silent. Back at the manor, they sought out Clara Wentworth, who was in the library sorting through a stack of ledgers. Her face paled at their approach, her hands clutching a pen as if it were a lifeline. "Miss Wentworth," Miss Marple said her voice gentle but probing, "you handled Mr. Harcourt's correspondence. Did he ever mention a letter to his daughter, perhaps one he meant to send?" Clara's eyes widened, her pen trembling. "A letter? I typed many letters for him, but nothing personal. He was private about family matters." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, of course, but papers have a way of being seen, don't they? Especially by someone so trusted. If Mr. Harcourt planned to change his will, you might have noticed a draft or a note. Clara's flush deepened, her voice barely audible. "I saw nothing like that. I only did my work." Craddock leaned in, his tone firm. "We've found evidence, Miss Wentworth, that suggests otherwise. If you knew of a change in the will, it's best to tell us now." Clara's hands twisted together, her eyes darting to the bookcase that hid the passage's exit. "I don't know anything," she whispered, but her voice cracked. Betraying her fear, Miss Marple thanked her, noting the panic in her eyes, the way her gaze lingered on the bookcase. She knows more than she says, she thought, and she fears we're close. As they left the library, Miss Marple said to Craddock, "We must keep that letter secret for now. It's a lever, Inspector, and we'll use it to pry open the truth." Craddock nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll have the constable keep watch on the passage tonight, and we'll press Lang again about his alibi. A motive for someone, but who?" Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Someone who feared losing everything, Inspector. The portrait has spoken, but the heart of this crime is still whispering. We're close, but we must listen carefully." As they stepped into the manor's courtyard, the clouds parted, casting a fleeting ray of sunlight on the stone walls. The letter, the passage, the portrait's hidden safe, they were pieces of a puzzle. But it was the human secrets, Clara's love, Victor's desperation, Diana's pains that would complete the picture. Miss Marple's mind was a tapestry, and she was determined to weave it to its conclusion. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The evening shadows stretched long across Harcourt Manor's lawns, their edges softened by the gathering dusk as Miss Jane Marple and Inspector Craddock stood in the Manor's entrance hall, their voices low. The discovery of the letter in the safe, penned by Reginald Harcourt to his daughter Diana, had cast a new light on the murder. Its promise of reconciliation, a motive that pointed to someone desperate to prevent a change in the will. The secret passage, the scuff mark, the dust-smudged typewriter, all were threads in a tapestry Miss Marple was weaving with care. But the final pattern required one more step, a trap to coax the guilty into revealing themselves. Miss Marple's eyes, bright with quiet resolve, met Craddock's. "Inspector," she said, her voice as soft as the rustle of her tweed skirt, "we must be subtle now. The letter is our bait, but we must cast it carefully. If we gather the household and hint at a new clue, the one who used that passage may betray themselves." Craddock nodded, his jaw set with determination. "A ruse, then. We'll say we've found something in the safe, something that points to the killer. If Clara, Lang, or one of the others knows about the letter, they might panic." "Precisely," Miss Marple said, her lips curving faintly. "Panic is a great revealer, Inspector. I once knew a lady in St. Mary Mead who gave herself away by rushing to hide a stolen brooch when she thought the vicar was coming. Let's see who rushes tonight." They moved to the drawing room, where the suspects were summoned under the pretext of a case update. The room's chandelier cast a warm glow over the velvet settees and polished tables, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Victor Lang stood by the window, his gold cigar case glinting as he lit a cigarette, his eyes wary beneath his polished exterior. Clara Wentworth sat rigidly on a chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, her silver brooch catching the light. Tom Brady slouched near the door, his scarred face set in a scowl, his hands shoved into his pockets. Diana Harcourt stood by the bookcase, her green eyes guarded, her posture defiant but brittle. Craddock cleared his throat, his voice authoritative but measured. "Thank you for gathering on short notice. We've made a significant discovery. In the study a clue found in a hidden safe behind Mrs. Harcourt's portrait. It sheds new light on Mr. Harcourt's intentions and, we believe, on his killer's motive." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Clara's face drained. Of colour, her hands trembling as she clutched her brooch. Victor's cigarette paused halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowing. Tom shifted his weight, his scowl deepening, while Diana's gaze flicked to Miss Marple, a mix of confusion and apprehension in her expression. Miss Marple watched them all, her demeanour serene but her mind alert. "The safe was a clever hiding place," she said, her voice gentle but carrying a subtle edge. "Mr. Harcourt kept something there, something he meant to protect. It's curious, isn't it, how secrets have a way of coming to light?" Clara's breath hitched, her eyes darting to Victor, who met her gaze with a barely perceptible shake. Off his head, Tom muttered something under his breath, his hands clenching in his pockets. Diana stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What was in the safe? If it concerns my father, I have a right to know." Craddock held up a hand, his tone calm but firm. "All in good time, Miss Harcourt. For now, we're asking you all to remain here at the Manor tonight. We'll have more questions by morning." As the group dispersed, Miss Marple caught the interplay of glances, Clara's fleeting look at Victor, Tom's sullen stare at the floor, Diana's rigid posture as she left the room. Someone knows, she thought, and they're afraid. We're close. She turned to Craddock, her voice low. Have your constable watch the library, Inspector, but discreetly. The passage may tempt someone to act tonight, thinking their secret is still safe. Craddock nodded, issuing quiet orders to a constable to take up position in the library, hidden behind a heavy curtain. If someone tries to use that passage, we'll catch them. But who do you think it is, Miss Marple? Clara's the closest to the library, and that letter threatens Lang's plans. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet certainty. Clara's devotion to Mr. Lang is a powerful force, Inspector. But we mustn't overlook Mr. Brady's resentment or Miss Harcourt's hidden fears. The letter changes everything, but it's the heart that will betray the hand. That night, Miss Marple remained at the manor, declining Craddock's offer to return to her cottage. She sat in a small parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly, a pretense of calm as her mind worked through the case's intricacies. The letter, promising Diana her inheritance, pointed to someone who feared losing control: Victor, whose business hung by a thread, or Clara, whose love for him might have driven her to desperate acts. Tom's grudge and Diana's pain were lesser threads, but not to be dismissed. The passage, the safe, the scuff mark, they were clues. But it was the human pulse beneath them that mattered. At midnight, a soft knock broke her reverie. Craddock entered, his face taut with excitement. We've got something, Miss Marple. The constable in the library, he caught Clara Wentworth. She crept in, carrying a small pistol, heading for the bookcase. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes gleaming. Did she? Now? And what did she say? She's in a state, Craddock said, leading her toward the library. Claims it's not what we think, but the pistol matches the caliber of the bullet that killed Harcourt. They found Clara in the library, seated on a chair, her face ashen and her hands cuffed by the constable. The pistol, a delicate thing with a pearl handle, lay on the table, its presence a stark accusation. Clara's eyes were red with tears, her voice a broken whisper. It's not what you think. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. Miss Marple settled across from her, her demeanour as gentle as a grandmother's, but her gaze unyielding. My dear, a pistol at midnight is a curious choice for innocence. Why were you in the library, heading for the passage? Clara's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. I heard you found something in the safe, I thought. I thought it might be something that would hurt Victor. I was going to check. That's all. Craddock's tone was stern. With a gun, Miss Wentworth, the same type that killed Mr. Harcourt. Clara's eyes widened, panic overtaking her. I didn't kill him, I swear it. I found the pistol in the library days ago, hidden behind a book. I kept it, in case someone came after Victor. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, her mind noting the lie's thin edges. Behind a book, you say? How convenient. And yet you chose tonight, after our talk of the safe, to investigate. Tell me, Miss Wentworth, did you know of the letter Mr. Harcourt wrote to his daughter? Clara's face crumpled, a sob escaping her. I didn't see it, but I heard him dictate something to his solicitor about Diana. He was going to change the will, give her everything. It would have ruined Victor, his business, his future. Miss Marple's voice remained gentle, but her words cut like a needle. And you love Mr. Lang, don't you? Enough to protect him, perhaps even at a terrible cost. Clara's tears fell freely now, her voice a whisper. I love him, yes, but I didn't kill Mr. Harcourt. I couldn't. Craddock exchanged a glance with Miss Marple, his expression grim. We'll take her to the station for questioning. The pistol's a match, and her story doesn't hold up. Miss Marple nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Clara's panic, her rush to the passage, the pistol's convenient discovery they pointed to guilt, but something in her eyes suggested fear, not cunning. She's protecting someone, Miss Marple thought, or she's been played. Aloud, she said, take her gently, Inspector. The truth is close, but it's not quite ours yet. As Clara was led away, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the bookcase, the passage's hidden door now an open secret. The trap had worked, but the game was not over. Victor's silence, Tom's sullenness, Diana's guarded pains, they were pieces, yet to fall into place. The letter, the passage, the pistol, they were threads, and Miss Marple was determined to weave them into the final truth. Chapter 11. The confession. The dawn light crept through the tall windows of Harcourt Manor's drawing room, casting a pale glow over the heavy furniture and the tense figures gathered within. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her hands folded calmly over her tapestry bag, her eyes sharp beneath their gentle exterior. The air was thick with anticipation. The events of the previous night, Clara Wentworth's capture in the library with a pistol hanging over the room like a storm cloud. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook tucked away, his expression a blend of resolve and weariness. The suspects, Victor Lang, Tom Brady, and Diana Harcourt sat or stood in uneasy silence, their faces betraying a mix of fear, defiance, and curiosity. Clara Wentworth, brought from the village police station under escort, sat pale and trembling, her wrists no longer cuffed but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The pearl-handled pistol, now in an evidence bag on the table, seemed to draw every eye, its delicate form a stark contrast to the violence it implied. Miss Marple noted the glances exchanged, Victor's guarded look at Clara, Tom's sullen scowl, Diana's rigid posture, and felt the threads of the case drawing tighter. Craddock cleared his throat, his voice steady but commanding. We're here to clarify the events surrounding Mr. Harcourt's death. Last night, Miss Wentworth was found in the library, attempting to access the secret passage with this pistol, which matches the caliber of the bullet that killed Mr. Harcourt. Miss Wentworth, you've claimed you found it hidden, but your actions suggest otherwise. It's time for the truth. Clara's eyes filled with tears, her voice a broken whisper. I didn't kill him. I swear it. I only wanted to protect Victor. Victor Lang, leaning against the window with a cigarette unlit between his fingers, stiffened, his face a mask of controlled surprise. Clara, what are you saying? I had nothing to do with this. Miss Marple's gaze flicked to him, noting the faint tremor in his hand, the way his eyes avoided Clara's. He's distancing himself, she thought, but not fast enough. She turned to Clara, her voice soft as a lullaby but with a steel beneath. My dear, you've carried a heavy burden. Love can make us do extraordinary things, but it can also blind us. Tell us what happened that night. The passage, the pistol, how did you come to use them? Clara's sobs broke free, her hands covering her face. I loved Victor, she said, her voice muffled but raw. Mr. Harcourt was going to ruin him. I heard him dictate a letter to his solicitor about changing the will to favor Diana. It would have left Victor with nothing, the business, his future, all gone. I couldn't let that happen. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Diana's eyes widened, her hands clenching, while Tom's scowl deepened, his gaze fixed on the floor. Victor's cigarette snapped in his fingers. A sharp crack in the stillness. Miss Marple leaned forward, her tone gentle but insistent. So you used the passage, didn't you? You found it in the Manor's plans, hidden in that book on architecture. You went to the study, and then what? Clara's hands dropped, her face a mask of anguish. I found the pistol in Mr. Harcourt's desk a week before. He kept it there, for protection, he said. That night I waited in the library, typing, until the house was quiet. I heard Mr. Lang leave for his meeting, and I knew Mr. Harcourt was alone. I took the pistol, went through the passage, and I shot him. Craddock's voice was sharp. You shot him, Miss Wentworth, and then locked the room to make it seem impossible. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I locked the door with his key, left through the passage, and hid the pistol behind a book in the library. I thought if it looked like no one could have gotten in, no one would suspect. I planted the draft will on the desk to point to Diana. She hated him. Everyone knew it. Diana gasped, her voice trembling with fury. You tried to frame me. You wretched. Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression calm but commanding. Miss Harcourt, please, let Miss Wentworth finish. She turned back to Clara, her eyes searching, and the letter in the safe. To Diana, did you know of it? Clara shook her head, her voice breaking. Not the letter itself, but I suspected he'd written something. He was talking about her, about making things right. I couldn't let him destroy Victor's life. Victor stepped forward, his voice smooth but strained. Clara, this is madness. I never asked you to do this. I knew nothing of it. Miss Marple's gaze fixed on him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Did you not, Mr. Lang? I find that curious. You stood to lose everything, your business, your wealth, if Mr. Harcourt changed his will or withdrew his capital. And Miss Wentworth, so devoted to you, might have acted to save you, with or without your word. Victor's face paled, his cigarette forgotten. I swear I had no part in this. Clara's misguided, but I didn't know. Tom Brady snorted, his voice rough. Misguided. She's confessing to murder, and you're playing innocent. Typical. Craddock turned to Clara, his tone firm. Miss Wentworth, you're saying you acted alone. No one helped you, no one knew. Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. I did it for Victor. He didn't know. No one did. Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of impressions. Clara's tear-streaked face, Victor's calculated denial, Diana's trembling anger, Tom's sullen silence. The confession fit the facts, the passage, the pistol, the locked door, the planted will. Yet something in Clara's eyes, a flicker of desperation, not triumph, suggested a shadow of doubt. She's protecting him, Miss Marple thought, but how far does her loyalty go? She rose, her movements deliberate, and approached. Clara, my dear, you've been very brave to tell us this. But truth is like a tapestry pull, one thread and others unravel. Did Mr. Lang ever speak of his fears for the business? Perhaps hint at what might be done? Clara's eyes flicked to Victor, then away, her voice a whisper. He said once that Mr. Harcourt was a fool, that he'd ruin everything to Moynages, but he never told me to do this. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on Victor's gold cigar case, his crumbling alibi, his subtle influence over Clara. He didn't need to, she thought. A word, a look enough to set her on this path. Aloud, she said. "Thank you, Miss Wentworth. You've helped us greatly." Craddock motioned to the constable. "Take Miss Wentworth back to the station. We'll need a formal statement." As Clara was led away, Diana stepped forward, clutching the letter from the safe, which Craddock had shown her privately. Her voice shook with grief and anger. "He wanted to make things right," she said, her eyes on Victor. "And you let her do this to him." Victor raised his hands, his voice calm but strained. "I had no part in it, Diana. I swear it." Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the faintest quiver in his voice, the way his eyes avoided hers. "He's clever," she thought, "but not clever enough." She turned to Craddock, her voice low. "Inspector, we have our confession, but I wonder if Mr. Lang's role is as innocent as he claims. His alibi is false, and his influence over Miss Wentworth is undeniable. We must press him further, but carefully." Craddock nodded, his expression grim. "I'll have him brought in for questioning. If he knew, or even encouraged her, he's as guilty as she is." As the room emptied, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze returning to the portrait of Mrs. Harcourt on the wall, its frame now rehung. "You saw it all, didn't you?" she murmured, as if the painting could answer. The confession had tied the threads. Together, the passage, the pistol, the motivette. Victor's shadow loomed larger than Clara's tears suggested. The truth was close, but one final knot remained to be untied. Chapter 12. The Quiet Resolution. The morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its rays filtering through the ancient elms that lined the village green. Harcourt Manor, once a looming spectre of secrets, seemed to exhale as the case drew. To its close, Miss Jane Marple sat in the manor's rose garden, a quiet corner where the air was sweet with late blooms and the hum of bees. Beside her, Diana Harcourt clutched the letter from her father, its words of reconciliation a bittersweet weight in her hands. The arrest of Clara Wentworth had unravelled the mystery of Reginald Harcourt's murder, but the final threads of truth needed weaving, and Miss Marple's steady hands were ready for the task. Inspector Craddock joined them, his overcoat unbuttoned. In the mild warmth, his face a mix of relief and lingering doubt. "Clara's confession holds up," he said, settling on a bench across from Miss Marple. "The pistol's a match, the passage explains the locked room, and her motive protecting Lang fits, the letter we found. But I can't shake the feeling Lang's not as innocent as he claims." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her fingers smoothing the edge of her shawl. "You're quite right, Inspector. Mr. Lang's shadow looms large, though he's careful to keep it hidden. A man like that charming ambitious knows how to let others take the fall. I once knew a gentleman in St. Mary Mead, a solicitor, who nudged his clerk into a shady deal while keeping his own hands spotless. People like Mr. Lang sow seeds and let others reap the consequences." Diana's voice, soft but edged with grief, broke the silence. "If Clara did this for him, and he knew, he's as guilty as she is. My father wanted to make things right, and they took that from me." Her fingers tightened on the letter, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Miss Marple reached out, her hand resting gently on Diana's. "My dear, your father's heart was in that letter, and no one can take that from you. People are complex, you so capable of great wrongs and quiet regrets. He meant to mend things, and that's a truth you can hold." Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open but untouched. "We've questioned Lang again. He swears he knew nothing of Clara's actions, but his alibi's a sham. No Peterson, no meeting. The Rose and Crowns barman says he was there only briefly, gone by 10:30. He's slippery, but we've no proof he planned it. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the roses, their petals falling softly to the earth. Proof is a stubborn thing, Inspector, but silence speaks to Clara's confession protects him, and his denials protect himself. I suspect he knew her devotion, perhaps even fanned its flames with a word or a look. But he's too clever to leave a trail. We can follow. Diana's voice hardened. Then he gets away with it, while Clara pays for his schemes. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. Justice has many faces, my dear. Clara's confession ensures she faced the law, but Mr. Life, his business, his reputation will unravel without Mr. Harcourt's wealth. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a man lose everything not to prison, but to his own pride. Mr. Lang's punishment may be slower, but it's coming. Craddock rubbed his jaw, his expression thoughtful. We've searched Lang's rooms, his papers nothing. Ties him directly to the murder. The passage, the pistol, the planted willets, all Clara's doing, by her own account. But I'll keep digging. If he so much as whispered a suggestion to her, I'll find it. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind remained sharp. Do, Inspector, but don't let it consume you. The truth has a way of surfacing, like a stream finding its path. Clara acted out of love, misguided though it was, and that love was her undoing. Mr. Lang's ambition was the spark, but her hand held the flame. Diana looked down at the letter, her voice barely above a whisper. I hated him for so long, but this changes things. I wish I'd known sooner. Miss Marple's hand tightened gently on hers. Regret is a heavy burden, but it's also a teacher. Your father's love was there, in his own way. Hold to that, and let the rest go. They sat in silence for a moment, the garden's quiet hum a bomb to the morning's wait. Craddock rose, adjusting his coat. I'll wrap things up at the station, Miss Marple. We owe you a great deal. That passage, the safe you saw what we missed. Miss Marple's smile was modest, her eyes distant. I only look where others don't, Inspector. A locked room is never truly locked. You see, if you understand the human heart, it's the oldest key of all. As Craddock departed, Diana lingered, her gaze on the roses. What happens now, Miss Marple? The manor, the business, it's all such a mess. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow but steady. Life goes on, my dear, as it always does. The manor will find its way, and so will you. There's strength. In you, I can see it. Use it to build something new. Diana nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek as she tucked the letter into her pocket. Thank you, she said simply, and walked back toward the manor, her steps lighter than before. Miss Marple made her way back to her cottage. The village waking around her children, laughing, a cart rattling down the lane. In her drawing room, she settled into her armchair, her knitting needles resuming their familiar rhythm. The case was closed. Clara's confession, the knot that tied the threads together, the passage, the pistol, the letter, the scuff mark. Yet Victor Lang's shadow lingered in her mind. A man whose cunning had escaped the noose, but not the consequences. A locked room is only as locked as the heart that guards it. She murmured, her needles clicking. The village settled into its quiet routine, but Miss Marple's sharp mind was already waiting, ready for the next puzzle that St. Mary, Mead, perhaps Harcourt Manor might bring.